Welcome back to Outside View Scandals. Today we're diving into a scandal so dramatic, so Shakespearean, that it could only come from the annals of royal history. That's right, we're talking about Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots, whose life was a whirlwind of intrigue, betrayal, and of course, scandal. And as if her story wasn't already dramatic enough, it all ends with her cousin, Elizabeth I of England, sending her to the chopping block. You'd think being a queen would guarantee a bit more job security, but not in Tudor times. But let's start at the beginning. Mary Stuart was born in 1542, and her life was complicated from the get-go. She became Queen of Scotland when she was just 6 days old. 6 days old. And most of us were still trying to figure out how to blink properly at that age, but Mary was already a monarch. And as you might expect, ruling a kingdom before you've even mastered walking is not exactly a recipe for stability. Mary's early years were marked by power struggles among the Scottish nobles, many of whom saw her as more of a political pawn than a sovereign ruler. But Mary's royal pedigree didn't stop at Scotland. She also had a claim to the English throne through her grandmother, Margaret Tudor, who was the sister of Henry VIII. And this made Mary both a queen and a potential rival to Elizabeth I, who was already having a tough enough time keeping her own throne secure. By 1558, Mary added another crown to her collection when she married Francis, the Dauphin of France, becoming Queen of France. And that's right, Mary was a double queen. But this royal jackpot was short-lived. Francis died in 1560, leaving Mary widowed and, quite frankly, in a bit of a political pickle. With no real power in France, she returned to Scotland, a land filled with Protestant reformers who weren't exactly rolling out the welcome mat for their Catholic queen. Mary's time in Scotland was, let's say, eventful. First, there was her marriage to Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, in 1565. On paper, it seemed like a good match. Both were young, good-looking, and had claims to the English throne. But as it turned out, Darnley was less ideal husband and more royal train wreck. He was arrogant, power-hungry, and had a knack for making enemies wherever he went. And things took a darker turn in 1566 when Darnley was implicated in the murder of Mary's secretary, David Rizzio. Rizzio was dragged out of Mary's presence and stabbed multiple times by a group of nobles with Darnley's blessing. It was a shocking and traumatic event, but Mary managed to keep her composure, probably because at this point she'd already seen enough drama to last a lifetime. Not long after, Darnley himself met a gruesome end. In 1567, his house exploded. Exploded, and his body was found nearby. Cause of death? Strangulation. No, I'm no detective, but that doesn't exactly scream accidental death. The prime suspect was James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell, who, wait for it, married Mary just 3 months later. Talk about moving on quickly. This marriage was the final straw for many of Mary's subjects. They suspected her involvement in Darnley's murder and saw her union with Bothwell as proof. An uprising forced Mary to abdicate in favor of her infant son, James VI, and she was imprisoned in Loch Leven Castle. But Mary wasn't one to give up easily. She escaped and tried to rally support, only to be defeated and forced to flee to England in 1568. And now you might think seeking refuge with her cousin Elizabeth would be a smart move. But this is Tudor England we're talking about, where family reunions tend to end in bloodshed. Elizabeth saw Mary as a direct threat to her throne. Mary's Catholic faith made her a natural figurehead for those who opposed Elizabeth's Protestant rule, and her claim to the English throne didn't help matters. Instead of offering sanctuary, Elizabeth had Mary imprisoned. What followed was nearly 2 decades of house arrest, during which Mary became the center of numerous Catholic plots to overthrow Elizabeth. One of the most famous was the Babington plot in 1586, a conspiracy to assassinate Elizabeth and place Mary on the throne. The plot was uncovered, and Mary's involvement, though likely minimal, sealed her fate. Elizabeth, who had always been reluctant to execute another monarch, was finally persuaded that Mary's existence was too dangerous to tolerate. In February 1587, Mary was tried and found guilty of treason. She was executed at Fotheringhay Castle, and in true dramatic fashion, she wore a red dress, the Catholic color of martyrdom. Even in death, Mary knew how to make a statement. Mary's execution was a scandal of international proportions. It outraged Catholic Europe, especially Spain, and provided a convenient pretext for the Spanish Armada the following year. Elizabeth's own reputation took a hit as well, with many questioning the morality of executing a fellow queen. But for Elizabeth, it was a calculated move to secure her reign, even if it meant tarnishing her legacy. And what about Mary's legacy? In the centuries since her death, she has been variously portrayed as a martyr, a victim, and a cunning political operator. Her life and death have inspired countless books, plays, and films, cementing her place as one of the history's most fascinating figures. Her son, James VI, eventually became James I of England, uniting the crowns of Scotland and England, a bittersweet irony given the struggles between Mary and Elizabeth. So, what can we learn from the scandal of Mary Stuart? First, that being born into royalty is less about glamour and more about dodging knives, sometimes literally. And second, that political alliances and marriages often come with more baggage than an overpacked steamer trunk. And finally, that even in the face of betrayal and death, it's possible to go out in style. So thanks for tuning in to Outside View Scandals, where we dig into the messy, dramatic, and utterly human stories that shaped history. And remember, the next time you are arguing with a relative, at least you're not plotting their execution, or so I hope. Until next time, and the next video is right here in the end screen.